Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole. It's another one of our weekly discussions about what's happening in Congress. And no question this week has been dominated by one topic, and that's the topic of impeachment. As I'm sure you know, there's a great deal of controversy around our telephone conversation between the President of the United States, the President of Ukraine, President Trump, and President Zelensky. And in that, it's alleged that improper activity took place, that there was an effort to unduly pressure a foreign leader to launch an investigation that would benefit the president politically in a domestic campaign. Frankly, the White House has been awfully cooperative in this investigation. They released a full transcript of the conversation in question. That's unprecedented, quite frankly. And there's no requirement that they do so. We usually don't allow conversations between the heads of states to be made public. Frankly, the concern is that in the future, people will be unwilling to be candid with the president in a discussion for fear that it will be released. The administration's also worked through the appropriate process and released the so-called whistleblower report to the public as well. And this is the item where there was alleged concern by a whistleblower. We don't know the identity of that person, don't know if it was a man or a woman or what their position is. We do know they did not hear the conversation in question. That is, they issued their report on the basis of conversations that they had had with other people, or frankly, things they had read in the newspaper. There's literally footnotes in the presentation to the New York Times or to the Hill newspaper. So it's pretty unusual. We've never had anything quite like that before. Whistleblower usually witnesses the act or has access to the documents that they're trying to inform the public about. In this case, the whistleblower did not. Final thing that's unusual is we're proceeding on impeachment without a vote, our impeachment inquiry without a vote of Congress. In the past, when we've decided to do this, there's always been a resolution that we would proceed setting up a special committee or laying out the reasons, and Speaker Pelosi chose not to do that. On two occasions this week, the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy of California, has tried to force that vote. Each time the Democrats have tabled his motion, that is, basically refused to consider it and postponed its consideration. That's politically done to protect members in vulnerable districts from having to cast a vote. Frankly, I think it's inappropriate. Every voter in the country should know whether or not their member thinks it's appropriate to begin to impeach. This is something that's going to put the country through a great deal of turmoil. The process ahead, as far as we can tell, will involve weeks of hearings, probably in the Intelligence Committee, dozens of witnesses. There were over a dozen people who listened to the president in that phone call. I suspect all of them will need to testify. And none of them, by the way, blew a whistle. Doesn't mean that they didn't have concerns. We simply don't know. That's what the testimony will be about. Other people are mentioned. The Attorney General of the United States, he may well have to testify. The former mayor of New York City, who's now the president's personal attorney, Mr. Giuliani, may need to testify. So this is going to consume a lot of political bandwidth, if you will. It's going to take a lot of focus off normal legislation for the American people, and I think people in the public need to know whether or not their members think this is a good idea or not. By denying that vote, I think the Speaker's basically disenfranchising every member of the House of Representatives from their opportunity to express their opinion on this issue, and I think also keeping the American people, particularly in selective districts, in the dark as to what their member would do. I just think that's a very inappropriate thing. We did see, by the way, two very different styles this week in terms of considering the whistleblower report. The United States Senate had a closed hearing. That means they considered it thoughtfully and over 8 hours, but there was no political grandstanding. The House, on the other hand, did it with the cameras all rolling, and I think there was a great deal of political grandstanding. Again, that's always a choice of the individual chairman. I respect that, but I think in this case, the Senate went about its duty with less disruption to the country than the House did. So I'm sure we'll be talking about this again in the weeks ahead. I would just caution everybody not to rush to any judgments. The two critical documents are out there. You should read them for yourself. You want to know what the conversation was. It's a relatively short document. It was actually a very short phone call. If you want to read the whistleblower's report, you should do that. But you should remember that's, while it may be sourced, it's unsigned. We don't know who that person is. I think we'll find out eventually, and then that person can be subject to being questioned and have the opportunity to make their case more fully. That's the appropriate thing to do. So again, I just wouldn't rush to judgment one way or the other. I would let the hearings proceed, let the information come out, and then make a considered judgment. But I do think at some point the House probably will vote before the end of the calendar year on whether or not to proceed to actually impeach the President of the United States. That's just my thought. There's certainly no scheduled vote, and things could change in that regard. But it promises to be a very tumultuous fall on Capitol Hill.